Keep a locked room at the end of the upstairs hallway. Always have. My son knows it's there. He's walked past it his entire life, but he's never once asked me what's inside. That never bothered me until the day his wife started asking about it every single time she came over. That was 2 years ago. Last Thursday, I came home from my cardiologist appointment and found the door standing open. I'd been expecting something like this. I just hadn't expected it to feel quite so final. My name is Walter Creed. I'm 64 years old, retired after 31 years as a civil engineer, and I live alone in the same house I bought with my wife Donna in 1988. Donna passed from a stroke 9 years ago, 3 days after our son Owen's 27th birthday. She died on a Saturday morning, which was her favorite day of the week, and I've never quite forgiven Saturdays for that. Owen was a good kid. Still is, underneath everything. He got his mother's patience and unfortunately her tendency to see the absolute best in people even when the evidence is stacking up against them. When he was in his 20s, that quality got him taken advantage of, twice. Once by a business partner who dissolved their LLC and disappeared with $18,000 of Owen's savings, and once by a woman who borrowed his car for a week and came back with a cracked bumper and a request for gas money. Both times I saw it coming. Both times I said nothing because I knew he wouldn't listen, and he didn't disappoint me on that front. So when Owen brought Renata home for dinner in the spring of his 36th year, I smiled and shook her hand and spent the evening watching her eyes move around my kitchen. She was 29. Pretty in the way that suggests significant effort. She laughed at everything Owen said, which would have been charming if Owen weren't the kind of man who tends to say things that deserve careful thought rather than immediate laughter. She complimented the original crown molding. She asked how old the house was. She ran one finger along the mantel like she was testing whether the wood was solid. After she left, Owen asked what I thought. I said, "She seemed very warm." What I meant was, I've seen that look before. I didn't say anything to Owen for the same reason I hadn't said anything the other times. He was 36, recently divorced from a woman who'd been perfectly fine but wrong for him in quiet ways, and he was glowing in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy who just learned to ride a bike. You don't walk up to a man glowing like that and tell him the sun is actually going to burn him. But I did call Donna's estate attorney the following Monday. Donna had been methodical about things the way I never was. I handled structure and load-bearing calculations. She handled everything that actually mattered. 6 months before her stroke, before either of us had any idea what was coming, she'd restructured our assets into a family trust, the kind that routes everything through a single beneficiary designation with specific conditions. She'd done it because her older sister had lost her house after her husband died, and his children from a first marriage contested the will. Donna was not a woman who allowed other people's carelessness to become her problem. The trust held the house, our joint investment accounts, and a life insurance policy naming Owen as the sole beneficiary. It was airtight. I'd added supplemental protections after Owen's first marriage ended. Not because his ex-wife was a bad person, but because I'd learned to be careful. And I updated everything again after I met Renata. The locked room at the end of the hallway was where I kept the physical files, the trust documents, the property deeds, the account records, and other things. Donna's journals, her mother's silver, the savings bonds she'd bought for Owen when he was born and kept in a cedar box with a card she'd written before she died. The room was spare, just a metal filing cabinet, a small bookshelf, and a cedar chest that had been her grandmother's. I put a keypad lock on the door 4 years ago when Owen mentioned that Renata had strong opinions about estate planning and had suggested that some of our family assets were, probably, underperforming. Owen had said this casually, the way he said most things, not registering that I'd gone completely still beside him. They got engaged 7 months after that first dinner. Owen called me from the restaurant where he proposed, his voice cracked open with happiness, and I told him I was proud of him, and that we should celebrate. I meant both things. I also called my attorney the next morning and made absolutely certain the trust documentation was current, witnessed, and stored in duplicate with his office. The prenuptial agreement had been delicate. I couldn't ask Owen to bring it up. He would have seen through that immediately. So I arranged for it to come from the attorney as standard practice for estates above a certain threshold. Owen was embarrassed about it. He told me Renata had seemed hurt. I told him that anyone who truly loved him would understand that protecting existing family assets was not a referendum on the marriage. Renata signed it at the kitchen table of their apartment 2 weeks before the wedding, barely glancing at the pages. I watched her from across the table and saw her decide very quickly that the document was a formality, that it could be worked around, that she had time. That calculation was visible on her face for about 4 seconds before she smiled and picked up the pen. The wedding was at a vineyard venue that cost $38,000. Owen paid for most of it. Renata's family contributed $4,000 and 2 cases of wine. The centerpieces alone were $6,500 because Renata had a vision. I gave them $15,000 as a gift and watched Renata's eyes do the math and find it insufficient. After the wedding, they moved into Owen's condo. Within 3 months, Renata had redecorated the living room, adopted 2 dogs Owen was mildly allergic to, and started a regular habit of dropping by my house unannounced. The visits followed a pattern. She'd arrive with coffee, always for herself, never offering to bring me any, and spend 20 minutes asking about my health. Was I sleeping well? Had I seen my doctor? Did I find the stairs difficult? She had the particular brand of concern that is really an inventory. She was cataloging my physical condition the way she'd cataloged my crown molding at that first dinner. The questions about the locked room started around month 4 of the marriage. Not direct questions at first. She mentioned, while standing in the upstairs hallway, that she'd love to help me organize if I ever wanted. She offered to call a professional organizer she knew. She said, once with her head tilted in exactly the right angle of innocent curiosity, that she'd always wondered what I kept in there. And wasn't it funny how a person could live somewhere for months and still not know every corner of it? It's just paperwork, I said. She smiled. Of course. I changed the keypad code that evening. Owen and I had a Sunday dinner tradition we'd kept since Donna died. I cooked, he brought dessert, we ate at the kitchen table and talked about whatever was happening in his life. After the wedding, Renata began joining him, which was natural and right, but the dynamic shifted. Owen would start to say something and glance at Renata first, just briefly, the way a person checks a gauge before proceeding. I noticed it because I'd spent 31 years reading load tolerances, and I know what a structure looks like when it's bearing more weight than it should. A year into the marriage, Owen mentioned, in the careful tone of someone delivering a message he hadn't written, that Renata thought it might make more sense for them to move into my house, given my age, given the space, given how much easier it would be for everyone. I said the house was mine and would remain mine for as long as I was alive, and after that it would belong to Owen, and I didn't see any reason to accelerate that timeline. Owen nodded. Renata, who was sitting across from him, smiled with her teeth. 2 weeks later, Owen mentioned that Renata had been looking into whether there were circumstances under which a surviving spouse could make claims against a trust established before marriage. I said that was an interesting question for her to be researching. Owen looked at the table. She said it was just general curiosity. People tend to research things they're curious about, I said. And people tend to be curious about things that matter to them. He didn't say anything, but I saw him understand something. My cardiologist appointment on that Thursday was routine. I have a mild arrhythmia that's been stable for 3 years and requires nothing more than monitoring and a pill I take every morning. I've never been seriously ill, but Renata had started mentioning my heart condition in conversation with the emphasis of someone making sure a jury remembers a key exhibit. I drove home, parked in the driveway, and noticed Renata's car before I'd even turned off the engine. She'd told Owen she was spending the afternoon with her friend Cassandra. I knew this because Owen had texted me that morning to say he wouldn't make Sunday dinner this week. Renata had plans, and he wanted to spend time with her. I mention this only because it tells you something about the kind of planning she was doing, and the kind of planning I was doing in response. I sat in my car for a moment. Then I went inside. She was in the upstairs hallway. The door to the locked room was open. The keypad housing was slightly scratched, the way a keypad looks when someone has tried several codes before landing on the right one. Later, I would confirm she'd used Owen's birthday. She'd watched me punch it in 6 months earlier. And while she'd gotten the sequence slightly wrong that time, she'd apparently been working on it since. She turned when she heard me on the stairs. To her credit, she didn't flinch. "Walter," she said. Just my name, in a tone that was trying very hard to be the tone of someone who belonged somewhere. I looked past her into the room. The filing cabinet was open, the second drawer. The folders were not the way I'd left them. She hadn't taken anything. I don't think she'd had time, but she'd been reading. "You should come downstairs," I said. She did. We sat in the living room, and I let the silence sit between us for about 15 seconds, which is longer than most people can tolerate. "I was looking for Owen's baby photos," she said finally. "He mentioned they might be up there." "Owen has never mentioned anything of the sort," I said. "He doesn't know what's in that room." She shifted. "I was curious. I know what you were curious about." I kept my voice even. I'd had years to decide how this conversation would go. "You've been curious since before the wedding. You've been curious in a very specific, document-focused way." A silence. "I love Owen," she said. "Tell me about your job search," I said. Her expression flickered. "What? When you and Owen got married, you were finishing a contract position and planning to look for something permanent. Owen mentioned it several times over the past 2 years. He was proud of your professional ambitions." I paused. "Where are you in that process?" "The market has been difficult." "For 2 years?" "Yes." "What did you make last year?" She stared at me. "That's none of your..." "Nothing," I said. "I know because I do Owen's taxes with him. He brings his documents every April, and we sit at this kitchen table and I help him file. There has not been a single dollar of income attributed to you in 2 years of marriage." Her jaw tightened. "I've been managing our household." "You've been managing his household." "You've been managing his household with his money." I leaned forward slightly. "Renata, how much do you think this house is worth?" She didn't answer, but her eyes moved, just once, briefly, in a way that told me she had a number. "You looked it up," I said. "At least twice. I have a network router that logs traffic, and I'm not a man who ignores the information available to him." She laughed, short and sharp. "You've been spying on me. I've been watching someone I suspected was treating my son as a financial strategy. Everything I've seen has confirmed that suspicion." I kept my voice steady. "The house is in a trust, Renata. The investments are in a trust. My life insurance names Owen as the sole beneficiary, with the payout going directly into the trust. The prenuptial agreement you signed specifies that all trust assets remain separate property regardless of the length of the marriage." I paused. "There is no version of this where you access what you've been looking for." The color in her face shifted through several phases. "You planned all of this," she said. "Donna planned most of it. She was considerably smarter than either of us. Your wife is dead." I let that sit for a moment. "Yes, she is. She was also a woman who grew up without enough and worked for everything she had, and she spent the last months of her life making sure that the life she and I built together would go to our son and not to whoever happened to marry him at the wrong moment." My voice stayed level. She knew men like Owen existed in the world. Men who love too easily and trust too freely. She loved that about him. It scared her to death. Renata looked at me with something that wasn't quite hatred and wasn't quite despair. It was the look of someone whose plan has just been shown to have no foundation. "What do you want me to do?" she said. "Not a question exactly. I want you to be honest with my son. He'll never believe you." "I'm not going to tell him." "You are." Her eyes narrowed. "Why would I do that?" "Because the alternative is that I show him the router logs, the trust documents, and a recording of this conversation." I reached into my jacket pocket and set my phone on the coffee table, face up. The recording app still running its timer. I pressed record in the driveway. "I've been doing that every time you've come over alone for the past 8 months. The silence that followed was the longest of the afternoon. She left an hour later. I heard her on the phone in the kitchen for most of that hour, talking to someone in a low, clipped voice. Her sister, I found out later. Then she came back into the living room and told me she would talk to Owen that evening and that she wanted me to know she had genuinely cared for him, at least in the beginning. I believe that, I said, because I did, partially. The math had just eventually overtaken the feeling. Owen called me at 9:47 that night. His voice was the voice of someone who's been crying and has stopped and is now in the hollow place on the other side of it. He said Renata had told him most of it. He said he needed to come over. He arrived 20 minutes later, and we sat on the back porch because neither of us could figure out what else to do with our bodies. It was a clear night, the kind of October evening that smells like wood smoke and cold grass, and we sat in the dark for a long time without saying much. "You knew," he said eventually. "Before the wedding." I suspected before the wedding. I knew after. "You should have told me. I've been preparing for this part." "Do you remember the summer you were 24, I said, and you lent your friend Danny the $3,200 you'd been saving for a truck, and I told you that Danny was going to have a very hard time paying that back, and you told me I didn't understand friendship, and Danny moved to Phoenix 6 months later." Owen was quiet. "Or when you were 30, I continued, and you put $9,000 into your coworker's investment opportunity, and I said I thought you should wait and ask some questions first, and you told me I was too cautious, and then the coworker stopped returning emails." "That's not the same thing," he said, but his voice was uncertain. "It's exactly the same thing. You are a man who leads with his heart, Owen. That's not a criticism. Your mother was the same way. But when I've tried to slow you down, you've heard it as a lack of faith in your judgment. And you've moved forward anyway." I looked at him. "Would you have listened this time? If I'd sat across from you 6 months before the wedding and said, I think Renata is interested in this family's assets, more than she's interested in you, would you have believed me?" A long pause. "I don't know. I don't think you would have, and I thought I could protect you without that conversation having to happen. I was wrong about that part. I should have tried anyway. That admission cost me something, but it was the true part of it." Owen put his head back and stared at the sky. "How much do you know about what she was doing?" "Enough. She's been searching estate law in this state for about 14 months. She asked her sister, I don't know this for certain, but I suspect it, whether a spouse had any rights to challenge a trust established before marriage." I paused. She was planning something? She hadn't fully committed to a course of action yet. That's probably why she was in that room today. She was still gathering information. So, nothing actually happened. Legally, no. You're protected. Everything your mother set up is intact. He was quiet for a moment. "What's in there, Dad?" "The room. I've never asked. I'd been thinking about this for years, actually. The right moment to show him, I'd imagined it happening differently. Not like this, not with the wreckage of his second marriage still smoking, but maybe Donna would say, there's never a clean moment for the true things." "Come on," I said. We went upstairs and I punched in the code and showed him. He stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it in. The filing cabinet, the bookshelf, the cedar chest. "This is Mom's stuff," he said softly. "Most of it. The financial files are in the cabinet, but the chest is hers." He walked to it slowly and knelt down and opened the lid. The smell of cedar and something older came out. Donna's journals were stacked on one side, 7 of them, spiral-bound, her handwriting on the covers. Her mother's silver wrapped in cloth. The cedar box with the savings bonds and the card. He picked up the card without opening it. "She wrote that a few weeks before she died," I said. "When she was still clear. She wrote one for me, too." I paused. She knew something was wrong. She'd been having headaches she didn't tell me about. I think she knew. Owen opened the card. I looked at the wall while he read it. Whatever it said, she'd written it for him and I'd carried it for 9 years without reading a word. When he set it down, his face was wet. "She was worried about me," he said. "She was always worried about you. In the best way. She knew I'd do something like this. Fall for the wrong person. She knew you'd love people completely. That was what worried her." I sat down on the floor beside him, which took more effort than it used to but felt necessary. She didn't set up the trust because she thought you were foolish. She set it up because she thought the world was complicated and you deserved a foundation that couldn't be taken from you. There's a difference. He sat there reading the card again for a while. I didn't rush him. Eventually he said, "What's the code?" "For the door." "Your mother's birthday." He looked at me. March 11th, 1957. We'd celebrated it every year. "Of course it is," he said. The divorce took 4 months. Renata hired an attorney who reviewed the prenuptial agreement, reviewed the trust documentation, and apparently advised her in plain terms that contesting either would be costly and unsuccessful. She accepted the settlement. Her personal belongings, her car, and a cash payment Owen offered of his own accord because he said he wanted it to be over cleanly. She did not get the dogs, which Owen kept, even though he was still mildly allergic to both of them. She moved to Portland to be near her sister. I know this because Owen told me and because I have continued, out of habit, to pay attention. It has been 7 months now. Owen comes to Sunday dinner every week, same as before. Sometimes he stays late and we watch whatever game is on and argue about things that don't matter. He is quieter than he was before the marriage. Not sad exactly, more like a man who has recalibrated something. He got promoted at work, the kind of promotion that comes to people who stop spreading their attention in too many directions and refocus on what they're actually good at. A few weeks ago, he mentioned a woman named Petra he'd met at a work conference. A structural consultant. He mentioned her twice in one dinner without seeming to notice he'd done it. I didn't say anything. But later that evening, after he'd left and I was cleaning up the kitchen, I found myself smiling at the window in a way that felt like something old coming back. Last Sunday, he told me he'd had coffee with her. She'd ordered her coffee and paid for it before he could reach for his wallet. He said it like it was a detail that didn't mean anything. "She sounds practical," I said. "Yeah." He was looking at the table, but he was almost smiling. "She really is." I told him to invite her to dinner sometime. He said maybe. I said there was no rush. After he left, I stood in the kitchen for a while. Then I went upstairs and stood in the doorway of the room at the end of the hall. The cedar chest was closed. The files were in order. Donna's journals were exactly as they'd always been. I've been thinking about having Owen come over with the attorney this spring. Sit down, go through everything together, understand what's his and how it works. He's 37 now. He's earned that knowledge. And honestly, I don't want to be the only person carrying it anymore. I punched in the code, 01157, and closed the door and listened to the lock click. "He's going to be okay," I said to the empty hallway. I think he finally learned it. I don't know if she can hear me, but I've never been able to entirely stop talking to her, so I keep doing it. Some days the house feels very quiet. Other days it feels like she never left. Mostly these days, it feels like enough. I've been sitting with this for a while now, trying to figure out what I'd say if someone asked me what the whole thing was really about, and honestly, I keep coming back to the same answer. It was about what a person decides to do with the time before things go wrong. Renata didn't become who she was in that hallway overnight. Every small decision she made, the choice not to work, the choice to research trust law instead of building something of her own, the choice to stand in a room that wasn't hers and open a cabinet that wasn't hers. Those decisions accumulated over 2 years of mornings where she chose the easier path. That's not a judgment. That's just how it works. We become, very gradually, the sum of what we kept choosing when no one was watching. What I think about most is Donna. She made her choices at the hardest possible time, when she was sick and tired and afraid, and she still sat down with an attorney and thought through every scenario she could imagine. She didn't do it out of suspicion or bitterness. She did it because she understood that love, real love, requires you to think further ahead than your own comfort. It requires you to protect people from things they can't yet see. That takes a particular kind of intelligence. Not the kind that scores well on tests, but the kind that looks at the world clearly and doesn't flinch at what it finds. Owen is going to be okay. I know that now in a way I wasn't entirely sure of before. Not because things worked out legally, Not because the paperwork held, but because when the moment came and he finally saw Renata clearly, he didn't collapse into denial. He grieved it, which was the honest thing to do, and then he got back up. That takes something. A lot of people don't do that. A lot of people rewrite the story instead of accepting what actually happened. Owen didn't. His mother would have recognized that in him. What I want to say, to anyone who's in the middle of something like this, carrying a truth someone you love isn't ready to hear, is that the carrying is not wasted. You may not be able to stop what's coming. You may have to watch someone walk into something you saw clearly from 50 feet away, but you can make sure the foundation holds. You can do the quiet, unglamorous work of protecting what matters. And when the storm passes and the person you love is standing in the rubble trying to make sense of it, you can be there. Not to say I told you so, just to say, I'm here, and here's what's true. And we can figure out the rest together. I spent 9 years keeping that room locked. Some people might say that was controlling. Maybe parts of it were, but most of it was just a man trying to honor a promise he made to the woman he loved in a hospital room a long time ago. I think that's worth something. I think the willingness to carry something heavy, quietly, for the sake of someone else. That's one of the better things a person can do with their time here. The room is still there. The code is still Donna's birthday. I'm not ready to change that yet, and I don't think I ever will be.